run would be to do this mail thing, because that's when they'll get the maximum prices they can get, right? And so they want to clear the market to maximize revenue. Why not just do that? Now, some potential problems that could arise is that we have to pay the guys in order to give them an incentive to come up with the right system. So that's going to be costly. And that's going to maybe cause some poor distribution of income in our society. We're going to have to give rents to these people, right? If we don't have a very large number of people, they could have some market power. And that market power could reduce the amount of resources we get. Or we might have to actually give it to a relatively small number of people and want them to have market power because they want to create. They have to have some market power to get rents from creating the right type of auction system, for coming up with this Weyl type of an auction system, right? So another alternative that we could have, rather, in order to get more flexible preferences, right? Because we said that the big problem that we didn't like about Eric's system is it required you to report preferences in this dinky way. An alternative is to go in the opposite direction and have individuals participate even less and rely on the computer even more. That's the direction Mohammed was starting to go in. He said, why have people report all their preferences like this? Why not just ask them some questions and then have the computer figure out what that all means, that are simple and easy for them to answer? So another way is to do everything inside the computer. Think about what Google or Netflix do, right? Google doesn't ask you, report to me what your ranking of all possible sites that you could see on the internet would be. Or even give me a binary pairwise comparison. Because of course that defeats the whole purpose of having Google there. It's supposed to know what you want to see based on some really simple thing that you put in, right? And Netflix is like that too. Netflix says you rate your movies, and then it doesn't say, tell me the order in which you'd like to see me present you all the possible movies. It just presents some movies to you and gives them ratings based on learning your preferences from what you've done in the past, right? And that's such a more pleasant system to use. It's simple for you. They try to think about what's the simplest information they can get from you to figure out what your preferences are. And then they use their computer to optimize what you get to see, right? This delivers what you want better than you ever could do yourself, right? Rather than having students clumsily report their preferences, the system learns their preferences from simple questions, or even better, from stuff that doesn't even cost people anything. I mean, reporting your movies doesn't really cost very much. Clicking on stuff on Google doesn't cost you anything. And imagine what it could do if it could watch you all throughout your life. If it could see everything that you've ever written on your computer. It could probably just figure out from that information what your preferences are. Much better than you would ever be capable of reporting or any simple set of questions could do. Because these machine learning algorithms, they're amazing. I mean, think if I could read everything Prashant had ever written, I would know everything that he was interested in. I could figure out exactly what would be the best allocation for him, far better than he could ever do in one of these markets where he would have to be trying to keep track of all the prices. And far better than he could ever enter into some dinky system that requires him to give points, right? And these sort of algorithms that let us do that, maybe that wasn't possible a while ago. These things are getting better every single day. And there's no need for a market equilibrium black box either. Eric said that there was this market equilibrium. But we know from the fundamental welfare theorems that a market equilibrium is equivalent to just having a Pareto-efficient allocation, and that equal incomes is just equivalent to it being fair. So screw even thinking about a market. Why don't we just say, look, the computer is going to observe what you do, figure out your preferences, and then it's just going to assign a fair and efficient allocation, where fair and efficient means Pareto-efficient and envy-free. Because we know that's equivalent to equal incomes and a market economy. Interesting. That's about as socialistic as you could possibly get, right? We're just going to watch everything that you do. We're going to learn your preferences. And we're going to assign you something that's fair and efficient. So that's kind of interesting, right? So the trade-off that we initially had was that Eric's system was sort of easy to use. You could enter a relatively small number of things. You didn't have to spend too much time. And it assigned you something that was fair and efficient. But the problem was it didn't allow you to express the richness of your preferences. And therefore, maybe it wasn't so efficient, actually, because it didn't take into account all the heterogeneity of people. A solution to that Mohammed presented, he's presented both sides of the debate now, was that we let people trade in sort of a decentralized way. And maybe we have some market clearing algorithm, whatever. Or maybe we even allocate it to a few people and people just figure out how to trade. But the problem with that is, we had to give rents to these people. It was confusing. It took a long time, et cetera, et cetera. But it allowed people to express the richness of their preferences. That's a trade-off. That is fundamentally the exact trade-off that economics, when we talk about capitalism versus socialism, has been thinking about for 100 years. But the amazing thing is we can do better than either of those these days, because we don't even really need to ask people their preferences. If we have good machine learning algorithms that can really interpret all this stuff that we do, and they can observe enough about us, they can just assign us the right allocation, right? And you don't have either the problems of not dealing with the heterogeneity or the problems of Buttigieg's system. Sorry, or the problems of the decentralized market system. Yeah, go ahead.
Is it possible that people's preference could be affected by the Google or Netflix? Is it possible?
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I mean, those things advertise, right? And so if you think that impacts people's preference.
Change the fundamentals of economics.
Well, I think I like to think of people's preferences as relatively stable and affected by other things. But yeah, if you don't want to think about it that way, if you want to think people are subject to influence, yeah, then these things can absolutely have an effect. I mean, the basic trade-off that we had before I talked about this was rigidity versus taxes on the student's time, having to pay these guys to come up with the idea of running the mechanism, the slowness, the unequal distribution of income. Those trade-offs between those two things, that's exactly the trade-off between capitalism and socialism. And what I'm trying to point out is that all this new technology is relaxing that trade-off, is allowing us to have both in some sense, and making it much more attractive to have this decentralized system that's actually really easy for people to interact with and just assigns to people what's in their interests. So let me try to summarize the ups and downs. The relative advantages of centralization are that there's little human error, less work to interact with. It clears quickly and efficiently, so there's not all these rounds. That's, if you read the Nobel Prize citation for Roth, all the advantages that he talked about in his centralized system, right? It's much harder to game because it's less clear how you use your market power. And it's easier to address externalities because we can just stick into the system anything you want to stick in. We don't need to go around collecting taxes, any of this stuff. And we don't need to give rents to people to get them to operate the system. The relative advantage of decentralization is it's more flexible to more heterogeneity. It gives people a sense of ownership. Though perhaps, as with Google and Netflix, people don't really feel that those are black boxes because they're used to using them and they're well marketed. And so it feels like it's just trying to serve me as well as it can, rather than that I'm losing the sense of control over the decisions I'm making on the internet. So the key is that the relative benefits of centralization are growing tremendously larger with the ability of computers to do things, because we can make much more flexible models of people's preferences, and we can learn people's preferences much better than maybe they're even capable of expressing them in the marketplace. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
For Google, you're just searching for something. So how would you relate that to something that's as complex as a marketplace?
Well, I mean, saying that you're just searching for something Google is pretty deceptive, because the truth is when you search on Google, almost everybody clicks on one of the first two links. And so what you end up buying is basically determined by what Google tells you you should buy. I mean, so in some sense you're just searching, but it has a huge effect on what you end up doing.
Finding information is maybe a little bit different than buying something.
Well, but a lot of people use Google to buy. A ton of people do. And Amazon too. Amazon also uses things like this to figure out what to present to you. And information, true. I mean, yeah, maybe it's just that you're always consuming in the marketplace of information. Which newspaper you end up reading is determined by what, how you search for information and things. Yeah, Neil.
I mean, it just feels like there's a
No, so I agree with that to some extent, but that's not, in some sense, what really matters in the end. As long, I mean, look, I agree that the fact that there's choice out there, you can always leave that open to people. You can always say, well, oh, instead of doing this, you can go and fix your thing some way. But in the end, most of the decisions are being made by a centralized system.
But isn't it like what Mohammed said, where we're mixing the two? Like in Google, because they're using this like market, like what people are selecting is affecting the central system. And I mean, it's not purely socialistic. It's not like they're just observing the. Well, is that? I guess it is.
It is, because you're just reporting something into them, and then they're making the decisions on the next thing. I mean, they are giving them a tiny little bit of feedback, but they're trying to minimize the amount of feedback you have to give them. And they want, hopefully, that you never are actually giving them feedback, because then they're performing extremely well, right? You only give them feedback when they mess up and a little bit along the margin. Yeah.
What
Yeah.
domains are you talking about? Like these improvement in efficiency can be achieved in like matching examples, but not, for example, in like market for like holidays, for food, like for meals. So like
I don't think that that's so true. Market for vacations, I mean, I think increasingly, in fact, this is already happening. What Google tells you you might be interested in when you search for vacation is hugely determined. So like, for example, I look at lots of things in Latin America. That means that whenever I search for vacations, I get ads to go to places in Latin America. Now, that's not perfect. If they had more information, they'd realize that I actually like to diversify across continents. And if they had seen my where have I been now information, where have I been, do you know that app on Facebook that says like, where in the world have I been? If they had that, they would realize I want to go somewhere I haven't already been, but I like this type of destination. And they would have a full set of my substitutability and complementarity and whatever. And they're getting there. Trust me, they are really getting there. I work with a mobile strategy company that is doing exactly this type of stuff, cross-application learning about stuff. The portrait we're going to have of people's preferences is going to be so amazing that nobody is going to want to opt out, and the less that they have to give negative feedback to the system, the more that it can learn based on just stuff they're doing naturally, the happier people are going to be with it. Because, of course, it's achieving an efficient allocation. So this, I think, shows us exactly the sense in which the welfare theorems are not at all what you've learned them to be. So the most fundamental theorems in economics are the first and second fundamental welfare theorems. The first says that any market equilibrium is proto-efficient. Many take this, maybe you guys took this, to say that laissez-faire is good and government is bad, right? That's the way a lot of people take it. But really, all this says is exactly what we've been saying, that there is no goddamn difference between a completely centralized system and a completely decentralized system in terms of just how they allocate the things if we don't take into account all the informational issues about who's reporting what. So just the bare market thing, which is usually where we stop, says absolutely nothing about the trade-off between socialism and capitalism. And the second fundamental theorem, that any proto-efficient allocation can be achieved by a market with appropriate transfers, many people say, oh, we shouldn't have distortionary redistribution. We should just redistribute everything in lump sums. But let me give you a much more socialistic interpretation of both of these theorems. So the capitalist interpretation is market does everything efficiently, leave it alone. But the socialists instead said what? Is Carl here? Carl, what's the socialist interpretation? I basically just gave it. But what's the socialist interpretation of the first fundamental welfare theorem?
Just that the market can't do any better than central planner.
Exactly. So that the planner can implement all the relevant conditions, and then in practice, markets suffer from all sorts of imperfections about market